Welcome back to another episode. My good friend Ollie here is an expert on California history. He's going to teach us about one of the most significant events in California history, the Bear Flag Revolt, and how it is a revolution, a reaction, and a reform.
The Bear Flag Revolt was a revolt against the Mexican government in Sonoma, California. It only lasted 25 days. However, the Bear Flag Revolt's reactions reshaped California's development, transforming it from a small disputed territory into a modern state. To truly understand this, we must first set the stage for what happened that led to the Bear Flag Revolt.
Okay. Sounds good.
Let's start with the idea of manifest destiny.
Oh, I know a bit about that. Isn't that the idea that American settlers have a God-given destiny to expand their country westward?
Exactly, and by doing so, they're manifesting it.
Makes sense. How does that tie into the Bear Flag Revolt?
Well, the reason the Americans wanted to annex California and Texas was mainly due to manifest destiny, the belief that it was their God-given destiny to conquer westward.
Well, they achieved their dream considering where we live.
Sure did, but at the cost of taking indigenous and ancestral lands and lives.
Well, also they had to fight Mexico, right?
Yes, that's true. The Mexican-American War began in 1846, mainly influenced by policies and the ideas of manifest destiny.
So, how did the Mexican-American War end?
Well, the war was just about decided in the September of 1847 with the defeat and fall of Mexico City.
Wait, I thought it went to 1848.
Well, it did, but the Mexican government started negotiations and surrendered in September of 1847.
How did that turn out?
Well, America and Mexico signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo just 5 months later, in February of 1848.
Wasn't that the treaty that ceded America large amounts of territory, including California?
Yeah, Mexico used to be so much bigger.
Alright, so now that I understand that, how did the Bear Flag Revolt actually happen?
Well, in 1846, the Mexican government controlled California, and they were worried that the American settlers were going to take over. The governor of Alta California at the time, Jose Castro, declared that all settlers would have to leave in 40 days or else they would be killed. This declaration was met with outrage by the American settlers.
Interesting, so what'd they do next?
Well, on June 14th in Sonoma, the Bear Flaggers broke into Mexican General Marinho G. Vallejo's house and took him captive. Despite the break-in, Vallejo actually favored American annexation due to Mexico's poor government decisions at the time.
Yeah, didn't he give him control of the Mexican barracks in Sonoma?
Yes, his capture led to their taking over of Sonoma.
Wow, this is an interesting story.
Yep, this is the origin of how the California flag was created. The flaggers needed a symbol to identify themselves in the Republic, so they stitched a rough flag and put a bear on it to represent their independence. In fact, I think this audio clip describes it best.
Having won a bloodless victory at Sonoma, Ide and Merritt then proceeded to declare California an independent republic.
Wow, that's so cool that they were really independent from Mexico and America.
Well, they weren't exactly fully independent. They did have support from John C. Fremont, who was known for being a topographer and explorer at the time.
Well, they were still mostly independent.
If you want to think of it like that, sure, but when Fremont arrived on June 23rd, he took command as well as added his 60 men to the rebellion. So, just one day after Fremont showed up, they had traveled to their Ulumpali for their first major battle.
Oh wow, so is this like a really eventful battle or something?
The Battle of Ulumpali is significant as it proved to the Bear Flaggers, who had never taken a real fight before, that they could fight and provided them with the confidence they needed to continue.
So what happened next?
Well, an interesting thing about that is they didn't really do much more. By July 1st, they had made their way into the San Francisco Presidio and sort of just chilled out.
Dang, this is less eventful than I thought.
Yeah, but stuff happens soon, I promise.
Okay, good.
Okay, so on July 7th, U.S. naval forces led by John D. Sloat arrived and captured Monterey, raising the American flag. Soon after, on July 9th, Robert Stockton, Sloat's replacement, forces had gained control of both San Francisco and Sonoma and replaced the Bear Flag with the United States flag.
Interesting. That is important as it helped them with the Mexican-American War by giving them more territory.
Yeah, quite true.
So what were the reactions from the Bear Flag Revolt?
Well, it had many short and long-term effects, but let's start with the short-term effects.
Alright, that makes sense. So does that lead into the end of the Mexican-American War?
Yeah, so after the Bear Flag Revolt, the Mexican-American War was still happening at the time until 1848, when the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed.
Oh yeah, so when the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed in 1848, it granted many territories, including a bunch of future southwestern states, but most importantly to this story, Texas and California.
Precisely. That's why the Bear Flag Revolt was so important, as it was a key victory for America in these wars and a large part of Mexico at the time.
Yes, many of these losses for Mexico were quite damaging at the time. According to Mexican authors, these treacherous North American invaders also brought crime, anarchy, and fear to this once peaceful nation. Although this quote refers to the Mexican-American War as a whole, it is instrumental to think about how everyone was affected by the Bear Flag Revolt, and that includes Mexico.
Yes, I also think that this has caused a cultural divide deep enough to exist in some places today.
Along with that, this land that was ceded had the gold beneath it that started the gold rush, which reformed California.
Yeah, so in Sutter's Fort, the first gold was found, and after that they kept looking for gold all around California, starting the worldwide phenomenon of the gold rush. It was merely a rumor until President Polk made a presidential proclamation declaring it to be true.
Yeah, that set off a reaction where, with all the people from all over the world moving into California, and especially San Francisco, it became the fastest growing city in the world due to the economic and population developments.
To add on to your point about the economic development, it wasn't just the mining and gold industry that took off, although it did. It was also the banking, mail delivery services, and about all industries that people wanted or needed.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, later on, when we talk about the economy in modern California, many of these seemingly small businesses are major factors in the growing economy at the time.
Yeah, but the gold rush didn't just reform America for good. The gold rush caused a massive genocide of the indigenous population. Between 1840 and 1870, the indigenous people living in California went from around 150,000 to 30,000.
Yikes, that's awful. How did this happen?
Well, most of them died from diseases brought by the American settlers, but others were killed by settlers in events such as the Tulawatt Massacre in Humboldt County or the California Genocide led by Fremont. Because of all the settlers trying to seize land in California, a lot of Native Americans were kicked out of their land or had their hunting grounds, fishing, or gathering sources disrupted. When they fought back, the miners often counterattacked and massacred the indigenous populations.
Wow, I'm just learning about this. How is this terrible part of history often overlooked?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question.
So what happened after that?
Sorry, it kind of gets worse. In 1850, the California government passed an act called the Act for the Government and Protection of Indians that pretty much legalized slavery for Native Americans and the removal of them from their lands. There were also state-funded militias that destroyed indigenous communities.
Wow, that's awful that a seemingly positive change can so negatively affect the history of California.
So you're more of an expert on modern California. So what would you say the long-term significance of the Bear Flag Revolt is?
Well, I would say that the modern-day California economy is so big because of the tech industry and the agriculture industry. These major industries have all influenced the economy as they bring in many people and are extensive. In particular, the agricultural industry is so important because everybody needs to eat, and due to California's sunny climate, crops are a largely available option for many. Back in the gold rush days, many miners who weren't able to succeed in the mining industry would become farmers as a way to sustain themselves financially.
Fun fact, crops were so valuable that they're often referred to as green gold.
Wow, very interesting. Anyway, in modern California, the tech industry is also incredibly large and arguably the most influential in the economy, namely due to Silicon Valley's development in the last 20 years. It has become known as the tech capital of the world and has been spearheaded by the major rise in technology all over the world. And due to this rise, many purchase electronics, bolstering the economy.
Wow, it's crazy how one small event I would consider a footnote in California history led to it becoming a state and later making it one of the largest economies on the planet. So ultimately, how does this relate to the theme of revolution?
Well, the Bear Flag Revolt is a revolution of California. Between 1846 and 1850, it went through 3 different identities.
To add on to that, the event itself was the revolution. It started with a small group of settlers not wanting to be killed, growing into a small army supported by Fremont, so one of the main reasons California was so quickly absorbed into America.
I totally agree with that. However, I've heard many people say that California would have become a state no matter what.
I disagree with that, because despite it all, the Bear Flag Revolt gained quite notable ground in the Mexican-American War.
Yeah, it's likely that if America hadn't won California early on, they likely would have had a worse footing in the war, ultimately leading to their downfall. However, thanks to the Bear Flag Revolt, this wasn't the case.
So what were the reactions to this, and how did it reform California?
The first major reaction was that the settlers moving in on indigenous land and after learning of gold and taking quite unnecessary actions.
Like what?
Well, the indigenous population faced violence, genocide, state-sponsored killing, starvation, diseases, enslavement, and damage to their land, such as mercury used in hydraulic mining getting into the rivers.
This is during the gold rush period, so it's all about the pursuit of indigenous land resources.
That audio clip demonstrates how they hurt them and bring them into the land. This begs the question, could they fight back?
They tried, but were often overpowered, killed, and displaced from their homes.
What other reactions were there?
The other main reaction is America annexing California, which is somewhat a result of the Bear Flag Revolt.
I agree. That's also an example of reform, as it reformed California.
Yeah, although going back to the topic of the indigenous genocide, it reformed white settler-indigenous relationships as the white settlers needed to rely on indigenous communities for protection from some Californios. This seemingly neutral, one-sided relationship quickly turned sour once gold was found.
Yeah, and the settlers thought the indigenous were like a roadblock in the way of manifesting their destiny.
Yes, this is why the Bear Flag Revolt reformed many important things in California history. Wow, I can't believe how influential the Bear Flag Revolt is.
Yeah, well, for such a small event, it caused many shockwaves.
Yes, I would say that it's quite important to talk about the small events like this as they can change many cultures' perceptions of others.
Yeah, as mentioned earlier, the gold rush caused a cultural divide so deep that the relationship between indigenous people and settlers is still damaged.
Yeah, it's sad, but despite all these ups and downs, the Bear Flag Revolt did revolutionize California's development, transforming it from a small disputed territory into a modern state.
Thinking back on all of this, I feel like the one lesson to take away is that you shouldn't repeat history.